How did America's worst defeat start? Well, France had owned Vietnam since around 1885, but that was abolished when the Vietnamese forced France out in 1954. This created a division. The northern part of the country was supported by the Soviet Union and China, and the southern part was supported by the United States. Sound familiar? In order to stop communism from spreading further into Asia, the US president at the time installed a premier to govern South Vietnam and sent US aid to the country. After several years and the death of JFK, the US decided to retaliate against North Vietnam, starting the Vietnam War, which answered the question, this is better than the iPhone, it is even better than an Android, or it was supposed to be. I'm talking about the Windows Phone, the one released by Microsoft back in 2010. The phone ran on a mobile version of Windows 7 that was the most original take on a smartphone since 2007, as at the time, Android was essentially just a copy of iOS. The Windows Phone was fluid, it was satisfying, and it was modern. It seemed like the phone industry would be a 3-horse race. So where exactly is it today? Well, the phone simply had no apps, and after Microsoft went all in with Nokia, the other phone manufacturers felt left out. It was eventually discontinued in 2017. Why are blimps not used anymore? I mean, the 25 that do operate are actually safe to fly. Well, first we should look at how many people are qualified to fly blimps. In the US, there are only 128 blimp pilots, and 17 are paid to do it full time. That 17 is less than the amount of astronauts that are in active service. Now, blimps don't use much fuel, but the cost of that fuel, helium, is incredibly expensive. One of the use cases for blimps was to be recording aerial footage, but nowadays, drones are cheaper and easier to use. What led to the most wasteful battle in history? During World War I, Ottoman Turkey was sided with the Central Powers. Britain wanted to knock them out of the war by taking Istanbul, helping Russia in the process. To achieve this, the British needed to take the Dardanelles Strait, the primary route into Istanbul. So at the beginning of 1915, Britain sent 18 battleships with an accompanying force to bombard the peninsula. This was eventually cancelled due to bad weather, so they instead prepared for a land invasion of the peninsula. Subscribe to see part 2. One mistake led to the death of over 500,000 people. To take the Gallipoli Peninsula in World War I, Britain prepared a force primarily of Australians and New Zealanders. These prepared to invade Gallipoli on the 23rd of April, but bad weather set it back for the 25th. The 1st Brigade was set to land on a flat beach, but due to their inaccurate maps, they landed a little north. They now faced hills and cliffs, but little Ottoman resistance. By the time the Ottomans came through though, the Allies had split themselves up, once again due to their lack of proper maps, and failure to capture the high ground. When the eventual Ottoman counterattacks came, the Anzacs were pushed back onto the beach where they stayed for the rest of their campaign. Subscribe to see part 3. The second attack of the most wasteful battle commences. After the unsuccessful landing at the now Anzac Cove, the Indian 29th Division land on Cape Helles to spare through the peninsula. The Allied forces successfully landed at the correct spot, but didn't advance far up the peninsula. After 8 months of entrenchment at the same spot and 550,000 soldiers lost in total, the Allies eventually retreated. The start date of this battle, the 25th of April, would become known as Anzac Day, which is the date that this video was published. What does space smell like? Of course, astronauts can't take their helmets off as their lungs would burst, but spacemen have reported that their clothes after a spacewalk smell like hot metal and seared meats. Others reported that their clothes smelled like welding fumes, with some even saying that it smelled like walnuts and brake tires. This is one of the worst dictators in history. In the 1960s, a Cambodian by the name of Pol Pot rose to be the leader of a communist party aptly named the Communist Party. Pol Pot had a vision to turn Cambodia into an agrarian utopia that could then turn into a communist country. In 1968, he launched a war against the US-backed Cambodian government, and by 1975, he controlled the entire country. Next, he forced the entire urban population into farmlands. Anyone with an education was re-educated or killed. Over 1 million people who didn't comply would be killed and then placed into mass graves in the fields that they worked on. So it is safe to say that these guys have to memorize over 25,000 roads and 20,000 landmarks. I can't even memorize my shopping list. The London taxi drivers have been around since the 1600s, where there were horse-drawn carriages. If these drivers don't remember all the roads in London, then they won't get get that taxi license. So in a world with Google Maps, this is quite impressive. There could have been nuclear war if it wasn't for one guy. Let me explain. On October 27th, 1962, the US Navy detected a submarine near Cuba. This submarine was the Soviet B-59, a submarine that hadn't been in any contact for the past few days. To get the submarine to surface, the US fleet fired training depth charges at it. Of course, as someone was shooting at them, the Russian submariners thought that they were at war and considered firing a nuclear torpedo at the US ships. In order to do that though, they needed the permission of all senior officers on board. 2 of the 3 officers agreed to do it, but one, Vasily Arkhipov, prevented the torpedo from being fired. The submarine began to run low on oxygen and eventually surfaced. But imagine what the world would have been like if the torpedo had have been fired. Your eyes are not deceiving you. This is a waterfall. However, the wind has gotten so strong that it's actually pushing the water upwards. This makes it a reverse waterfall, and it is truly breathtaking. The Dead Sea is literally dying. The Dead Sea is a large lake located in Israel, and it is one of the saltiest bodies of water in the world. Unfortunately though, the lake is dying, and it is sinking 1 meter every year. It is only half the length that it was just a century ago, the reason being that the nearby developments were taking this water for themselves. The sea's main water source, the Jordan River, has been siphoned off over the decades, so there was no water coming into the Great Lake, and this doctor didn't want to put his ear on his female clients' chests to hear their heartbeat. So, in the 1860s, Dr. Laennec, a French doctor, rolled a bit of paper into a tube and used that in replacement of his ear. He found that the paper amplified the sound of the heartbeat and called his design the stethoscope, after the Greek words for chest and to view. This is Apple's clothing line. Yes, I am talking about the tech company. After Steve Jobs resigned as chairman in 1986, the company tried to see if fans would buy Apple clothes to further express their interest in the brand. You decide if you like them or not. Back then they weren't very popular, and Apple never continued with its lifestyle brand. This is how bowling balls are made. This is how car tires are made. And this is how glass marbles are forged.